The wagon lurched to a sudden stop in the middle of the Arizona desert, and Grace Gallagher knew this was her only chance to run before reaching the preacher who would bind her to a man she despised with every fiber of her being. The scorching June sun of 1878 beat down mercilessly as Grace pressed herself against the rough wooden side of the covered wagon, her heart hammering so violently she feared the driver would hear it over the creaking wheels and plodding hooves. She had been traveling for 3 days from her father's ranch in New Mexico Territory, accompanied only by her uncle's hired hand, who had been paid handsomely to deliver her to Bernard Whitmore in Fort Yuma, California. Bernard was 47 years old, a wealthy merchant with cold eyes and colder hands that had grabbed at her waist during their only meeting. Her father had arranged the marriage to settle gambling debts, and Grace had fought with every argument she could muster, but her protests had fallen on deaf ears. "We are stopping to water the horses," the driver called back gruffly. "Do not wander far if you need to stretch your legs." Grace's pulse quickened. She had been planning this moment since they left New Mexico, carefully observing the route, noting landmarks, counting supplies. She had secreted away dried beef, hardtack, and a canteen of water in her carpet bag, along with her mother's silver hairbrush and the small amount of money she had saved over the years. It was not much, but it was everything she owned in the world, besides the simple traveling dress she wore and the worn boots on her feet. The driver climbed down with a grunt, his attention focused on the team of horses. Grace gathered her courage, grabbed her carpet bag, and slipped out the back of the wagon as quietly as a shadow. Her feet hit the sun-baked earth, and she ran. She ran toward the rocky outcroppings in the distance, her skirts tangled around her legs, sweat already streaming down her back in the oppressive heat. Behind her, she heard a shout of alarm, but she did not stop. She could not stop. The desert landscape was unforgiving, all scraggly brush and sharp rocks that seemed determined to trip her with every step. Grace's lungs burned as she pushed herself harder, ducking behind a large boulder just as she heard the driver cursing loudly. She pressed her back against the hot stone, trying to quiet her ragged breathing, listening as his footsteps crunched closer. "Miss Gallagher, you get back here right now. Your father will have my hide if I lose you." Grace squeezed her eyes shut, praying he would give up, praying the desert would swallow her whole before she would let herself be dragged to Fort Yuma. The footsteps came closer, and she knew she had to move again. She darted from her hiding place, scrambling up a rocky incline, her hands scraping against the rough surface. A shot rang out, echoing across the empty landscape, and Grace's blood turned to ice. "That was a warning, girl. The next one will not be." Terror gave her strength she did not know she possessed. She crested the rise and half ran, half slid down the other side, her dress tearing on thorny bushes. The landscape opened up before her, revealing a small valley with what looked like a creek bed running through it. She made for it desperately, hoping to find water, hoping to find anywhere to hide. She had just reached the dry creek bed when she heard hoofbeats, not from the direction of the wagon, but from ahead of her. Grace froze, her eyes searching frantically, and then she saw him. A man on horseback, riding along the creek bed with the easy confidence of someone who belonged to this harsh land. He wore typical cowboy attire, a worn hat pulled low against the sun, a faded blue shirt, leather chaps, and a gun belt slung around his hips. As he drew closer, she could make out more details. He appeared to be in his mid-20s, with sun-bronzed skin and dark hair that curled slightly at his collar. Grace stood paralyzed with indecision. Behind her, the driver was still shouting and searching. Ahead of her, this stranger represented an unknown threat. But as the cowboy's eyes met hers across the distance, something in his steady gaze made a decision for her. She ran toward him. "Please," she gasped out as she reached his horse, looking up at him with desperate eyes. "Please help me. I am running from a marriage I never wanted. The man chasing me is taking me to Fort Yuma against my will." The cowboy's expression remained calm, but his eyes sharpened with understanding. He glanced past her, clearly hearing the driver's continued shouts, then looked back down at her flushed, frightened face. Without a word, he reached down and extended his hand. "Can you ride?" "Yes," Grace said, though her voice shook. "Then climb up behind me and hold on tight. We are going to move fast." Grace did not hesitate. She grasped his strong hand and let him pull her up behind him on the horse. The moment she was seated, she wrapped her arms around his waist, her carpet bag clutched awkwardly against his side. The cowboy spurred his horse into motion, and they took off at a gallop that left Grace breathless. The landscape blurred around them as they raced along the creek bed, then veered sharply into a narrow canyon. Behind them, she heard another shot, but the distance was already too great. The cowboy guided his horse expertly through terrain that would have been impossible for a wagon to follow, taking turns that seemed to know by instinct. Grace clung to him, feeling the solid strength of his back against her cheek, the steady rhythm of his breathing even as they fled. She did not know who this man was or why he had helped her, but gratitude flooded through her with overwhelming force. They rode for what felt like hours, though it was probably less than one, before the cowboy finally slowed his horse to a walk. They had entered a region of red rock formations that towered above them like ancient sentinels. He guided them into a sheltered area, where a thin stream of water trickled from between rocks, forming a small pool before disappearing into the sand. "We should be safe here for now," he said, his voice low and measured. It was the first time Grace had really heard him speak, and she was struck by how steady and calm he sounded, as if helping strange women escape forced marriages was something he did regularly. "That fellow will not track us through this terrain, especially not with a wagon to worry about." He dismounted first, then turned to help Grace down. Her legs trembled when her feet hit the ground, and she would have stumbled if he had not steadied her with a hand on her elbow. Up close, she could see his face more clearly. He had strong, honest features with a straight nose and a firm jaw shadowed with stubble. His eyes were a striking dark brown, almost black in the shadows of his hat brim, and they regarded her with curiosity, but without judgment. "Thank you?" Grace managed, her voice hoarse from the heat and exertion. "I do not know how I can ever repay you for what you just did." "No repayment needed," he said simply. He released her elbow and moved to tend to his horse, checking the animal's legs and offering it water from the small pool. A woman should not be forced into a marriage she does not want. That is just basic decency. Grace sank down onto a flat rock, her entire body shaking now that the immediate danger had passed. The reality of what she had done was starting to sink in. She had run away. She had escaped, but now what? She had no money to speak of, no family who would support her decision, and nowhere to go. The vast emptiness of the Arizona territory stretched out around her, beautiful and terrifying in equal measure. The cowboy seemed to sense her thoughts. He filled his canteen from the stream and brought it to her. "Drink slowly," he advised. "The heat out here can kill you faster than any man with a gun." Grace accepted the canteen with grateful hands and took small sips of the cool water. It tasted like heaven. "What is your name?" she asked when she finally lowered the canteen. "Marcus Everett," he said, settling onto his haunches nearby, his eyes scanning their surroundings with the alert awareness of someone accustomed to danger. "I work for the Double R Ranch about 20 miles north of here. I was checking on some stray cattle when I spotted you." "I am Grace Gallagher," she replied. "I was being taken from my father's ranch in New Mexico Territory to Fort Yuma to marry a man named Bernard Whitmore. He is a merchant there, much older than me, and—" She swallowed hard, the words sticking in her throat. "My father sold me to him to pay off debts. I could not go through with it. I just could not." Marcus's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. "How old are you, if you do not mind my asking?" 21, Grace said. "Old enough to know my own mind, but my father says a daughter has no choice but to obey. He said I was being selfish and ungrateful." "You are neither of those things," Marcus said firmly. "You are brave. Running into the desert with nothing but a carpetbag takes more courage than most people have." His words warmed something inside Grace that had been cold for a very long time. She studied him more carefully now that the panic was subsiding. Marcus Everett could not be much older than she was, perhaps 25 or 26. He had the weathered look of someone who spent his life outdoors, with fine lines at the corners of his eyes from squinting against the sun. There was a competence about him, a quiet strength that made her feel safer than she had in months. "What will you do now?" Marcus asked, echoing her own unspoken question. "I do not know," Grace admitted. "I have a little money, but not enough to get far. I thought perhaps I could find work somewhere, as a seamstress or a cook or anything really. I just need to get far enough away that my father and Bernard Whitmore cannot find me." Marcus was quiet for a long moment, his gaze distant. Then he seemed to come to a decision. The Double R is run by a good man named Robert Russell. His wife Sarah manages the household, and she has been talking about needing help, especially with their daughter, who is expecting a baby soon. If you are willing to work, I could take you there and speak to them on your behalf. Hope flared in Grace's chest so suddenly it almost hurt. You would do that? You would help me find work? I would, Marcus said, meeting her eyes directly. But I need to be honest with you, Grace. This country is hard on women, especially women alone. If your father or this Whitmore fellow come looking for you, there could be trouble. Are you prepared for that? Grace thought of Bernard Whitmore's meaty hands on her waist, thought of spending the rest of her life in a loveless marriage to a man who looked at her like property. She straightened her shoulders and met Marcus's gaze with all the determination she could muster. I am prepared. I would rather face whatever comes than go back to that life. Marcus nodded slowly, a hint of approval in his eyes. Then, we will rest here for a couple of hours until the worst heat of the day passes. My horse needs the break after that run. Then we will head to the Double R. It is going to be a long ride, but we should make it before dark if we do not run into trouble. Thank you, Marcus, Grace said softly. I do not understand why you are being so kind to a stranger, but I am grateful beyond words. Marcus adjusted his hat and looked out at the desert landscape. My mother was in a similar situation once, before she met my father. A man tried to force her into marriage, and someone helped her get away. She always told me that we have an obligation to help others when we can, especially when it comes to matters of the heart and freedom. I guess her lesson stuck with me. Grace felt tears prick at her eyes, but she blinked them back. She had cried enough over the past weeks, mourning the loss of her freedom and autonomy. Now was the time to be strong, to embrace this chance she had been given. Your mother sounds like a wonderful woman. She was, Marcus said quietly. She passed 3 years ago. Fever took her fast. But I try to live by what she taught me. They sat in companionable silence for a while, the only sounds the gentle trickle of water and the occasional snort from Marcus's horse. Grace felt exhaustion creeping over her now that the adrenaline was fading. She had barely slept in the wagon, too nervous about what awaited her in Fort Yuma to find rest. You should try to sleep a little, Marcus suggested, as if reading her thoughts. I will keep watch. No one is going to sneak up on us here. Grace wanted to protest that she could not possibly sleep, but her body had other ideas. She curled up on the relatively flat ground, using her carpet bag as a pillow, and found her eyes drifting closed almost immediately. The last thing she was aware of was the comforting presence of Marcus nearby, alert and protective. She woke to the feeling of a gentle hand on her shoulder. Grace's eyes flew open, momentarily disoriented, and she saw Marcus crouch beside her. The sun had moved significantly across the sky, and the shadows were longer now. Time to go, he said quietly. The heat is letting up, and we need to cover ground while we still have daylight. Grace sat up, brushing dust and sand from her dress. Every muscle in her body ached, and her mouth felt like cotton, but there was a determination in her heart that had not been there before. Marcus helped her to her feet and then onto his horse again. This time, when she wrapped her arms around his waist, it felt less like a desperate grab for safety and more like trust. They rode through the changing landscape as afternoon turned to evening. Marcus pointed out landmarks as they went, teaching her to read the terrain the way he did. He showed her how to spot water sources, which plants were safe and which were dangerous, how to tell direction by the sun and stars. Grace absorbed everything, realizing that if she was going to make a life out here, she needed to understand this land. You are a good teacher, she said, after he had explained how to identify a rattlesnake's warning signs. Just practical knowledge, Marcus replied. Out here, ignorance can kill you. The desert does not forgive mistakes. Is that why you are so careful? So watchful all the time? Grace felt him shrug slightly beneath her arms. I suppose. I have seen enough men die from carelessness or overconfidence. The ones who survive are the ones who respect the land and stay alert. How long have you worked for the Double R? Grace asked, genuinely curious about this man who had so dramatically changed her fate. 5 years now. I came out west from Missouri when I was 19, looking for adventure and fortune like every other fool boy with more dreams than sense. There was wry humor in his voice. Found out quickly that ranching is hard, dirty work that breaks your back and pays poorly. But I found I liked it anyway, Like the open space, the freedom, the honesty of it. A good day's work gets you a good day's pay, and no one cares who your family was or what mistakes you made before. Do you have family back in Missouri? Grace asked. A sister and a brother, both married with families of their own. We write occasionally, but it has been 3 years since I have seen them in person. The distance is considerable, and ranch work does not leave much time for visiting. Grace understood that loneliness, that separation from family, even when the separation was necessary. I have a younger brother, she said softly. Thomas, he's only 16. I worry about what my father will do to him when he finds out I ran. Thomas always tried to defend me, and father does not take kindly to being contradicted. Your brother will be fine, Marcus said with more confidence than Grace felt. Men like your father tend to take their anger out on the people who defy them directly, not innocent bystanders. And a 16-year-old boy is nearly grown. He can take care of himself. Grace wanted to believe that, but she knew her father's temper all too well. Still, there was nothing she could do about it now. She had made her choice, and she had to live with all the consequences, including the ones that hurt. The sun was painting the sky in shades of orange and pink when Marcus finally said, "There. See those buildings in the distance? That is the Double R." Grace peered around his shoulder and saw a collection of structures nestled in a valley between low hills. There was a main house, a large barn, several smaller outbuildings, and corrals containing horses and cattle. Smoke rose from the chimney of the main house, and even from this distance Grace could see the warm glow of lamplight in the windows. It looked like home, or at least like what she had always imagined a real home should look like. As they approached, several ranch hands looked up from their work, curiosity evident on their faces. A tall man in his 50s emerged from the barn, wiping his hands on a rag. He had silver streaking through his brown hair, and the bearing of someone accustomed to authority. "Marcus!" the man called out as they rode into the yard. "We were starting to wonder if those strays had carried you all the way to Mexico." His eyes moved to Grace, and his expression shifted to one of polite confusion. "And you brought company." Marcus dismounted and then helped Grace down. She was acutely aware of how disheveled she must look, with her dress torn and dusty, her hair falling loose from its pins, her face surely sunburned despite her bonnet. "Mr. Russell, this is Miss Grace Gallagher," Marcus said formally. "She is in need of help, and I was hoping we could speak with you and Mrs. Russell privately." Robert Russell's weathered face showed no judgment, only concern. "Of course. Come on up to the house. Sarah just finished cooking supper, and we always have room for one more at the table." He raised his voice slightly. "James, take care of Marcus's horse, will you?" A younger ranch hand hurried over to take the reins, and Grace found herself being ushered toward the main house. It was a solid structure built of adobe and wood, designed to withstand the harsh climate. As they climbed the steps to the porch, the front door opened and a woman appeared. Sarah Russell was perhaps 5 years younger than her husband, with kind eyes and graying blonde hair pulled back in a practical bun. She took one look at Grace's bedraggled state and immediately moved forward. "Oh, you poor dear. Come in, come in. Whatever has happened, we can sort it out once you have had some food and water." Grace felt her composure cracking under the weight of such immediate kindness. "Thank you, Mrs. Russell. I am sorry to intrude on your evening like this." "Nonsense," Sarah said firmly, guiding Grace into a comfortable parlor. "Marcus does not bring people home without good reason. Sit down here while I fetch you some water and a damp cloth for your face." Robert Russell gestured for Marcus to follow him into what looked like a study, leaving Grace alone in the parlor for a moment. She sat gingerly on the edge of a well-worn sofa, taking in her surroundings. The room was furnished simply but comfortably, with handmade quilts draped over chairs and family photographs on the walls. It felt lived in and loved, so different from the cold formality of her father's house. Sarah returned quickly with a pitcher of water, a glass, and a basin with a cloth. "Here now, drink this slowly and clean yourself up a bit. You look like you have been through quite an ordeal." Grace accepted the water gratefully and took several long drinks before using the damp cloth on her face and hands. The cool water was heavenly against her sunburned skin. "Thank you. You are very kind. Marcus is one of our best men," Sarah said, settling into a chair across from Grace. "If he brought you here, then you must need help. You do not have to tell me anything you are not comfortable sharing, but please know that you are safe here." Grace looked into Sarah Russell's honest, caring face and felt the last of her walls crumble. "I was running from a forced marriage, she said quietly. My father was taking me to Fort Yuma to marry a man I barely know, a man old enough to be my father himself. I could not do it, so I ran. Marcus found me in the desert and helped me escape. He said you might have work for me, that I could earn my keep here. Sarah's expression hardened with anger on Grace's behalf. Your father was forcing you? At your age? I am 21, old enough to have my own opinions, but my father does not see it that way. He gambled away money he did not have and decided to settle his debts by selling me off. The bitterness in Grace's voice was impossible to hide. That is unconscionable, Sarah said flatly. And yes, we absolutely have work for you if you want it. Our daughter Margaret lives here with her husband Peter. They have a small cabin on the property. Margaret is 7 months along with her first child, and she has been having a difficult time. I have been helping her, but I am running the household here as well, and it has been overwhelming. If you are willing to help with cooking, cleaning, and eventually helping with the baby, we would be grateful to have you. I am willing to do anything, Grace said earnestly. I am a hard worker, I promise you that. I can cook, clean, sew, tend a garden, whatever you need. I just need a safe place to be, somewhere my father and Bernard Whitmore cannot force me back into that life. Sarah reached over and squeezed Grace's hand. Then you shall have it. We will work out the details with Robert. But I can tell you right now that you are welcome here for as long as you need. Grace felt tears spill down her cheeks before she could stop them. Thank you, she whispered. Thank you so much. The door to the study opened and Robert Russell emerged with Marcus behind him. Robert's expression was serious, but not unkind. Miss Gallagher, Marcus has explained your situation to me. I want you to know that we will not turn you away or force you to return to a situation you fled from. However, I must be honest with you about the complications this might bring. If your father or this Bernard Whitmore come looking for you, there could be legal challenges. In the eyes of the law, you are your father's responsibility until you marry, no matter your age. I understand, Grace said, wiping at her tears. But I would rather face legal challenges than marry a man I do not love and who does not love me. I will not be sold like cattle. Robert nodded approvingly. Good, a woman with backbone. Sarah and I will give you room and board in exchange for work around the ranch. We will pay you a small wage as well, so that you can save up your own money. If anyone comes looking for you, we will say you are an employee of ours, which will be the truth. Beyond that, we will deal with problems as they arise. Marcus spoke up from where he leaned against the doorframe. I will keep an ear out in town for any word of people searching for a missing woman. If I hear anything, I will let you know so you can be prepared. Grace looked at these 3 people who had shown her more kindness in a few hours than her own family had shown her in months. I do not know how to thank you all properly. You are giving me my life back. Just work hard and be honest with us, Robert said. That is all the thanks we need. Now, Sarah, why do not you show Miss Gallagher to the spare room? She looks dead on her feet. There is supper first, Sarah said firmly. The girl needs food in her belly. Come along, Grace. Let me introduce you to the rest of the household. Supper that night was a warm, boisterous affair. Margaret and her husband Peter joined them, along with 2 other ranch hands who boarded at the house. Margaret was a younger version of her mother, with the same kind eyes and quick smile, though her face was drawn with the exhaustion of late pregnancy. Peter was a quiet man who clearly adored his wife, jumping up to fetch her anything she needed before she could even ask. Grace found herself seated next to Marcus, and she was acutely aware of his presence throughout the meal. He did not talk much, but when he did speak, the others listened with respect. She noticed how comfortable he was with this family, how they treated him less like an employee and more like a trusted friend. It spoke well of both Marcus and the Russells. After supper, Sarah showed Grace to a small room off the kitchen. It was simply furnished with a bed, a washstand, and a trunk for storage. But it was clean and private, and Grace loved it immediately. Sarah brought her a nightgown to borrow and promised to help her acquire some proper work clothes in the coming days. We start early on a ranch, Sarah warned kindly. Breakfast is at 5:30, and then the day's work begins. But tonight, you should rest. You have been through enough for one day. Grace changed into the borrowed nightgown and climbed into bed, her body aching, but her heart lighter than it had been in months. Through the window, she could see stars emerging in the darkening sky, more stars than she had ever seen in her life. She thought of Marcus, probably bedding down in the bunkhouse with the other ranch hands. She thought of how safe she had felt with her arms around him on the horse, how steady and calm his presence had been in her moment of greatest terror. She fell asleep thinking of dark eyes that held no judgment, only kindness, and for the first time in a long time, her dreams were peaceful. The next morning, Grace woke to the sound of roosters crowing and the distant lowing of cattle. For a moment, she was disoriented, unable to remember where she was. Then memory flooded back, and she sat up quickly, afraid it had all been a dream. But no, she was in the small room at the Double R Ranch, and sunlight was just starting to filter through the window. She dressed quickly in her worn traveling dress, the only clothes she had, and made her way to the kitchen. Sarah was already there, working at the stove, and she smiled when she saw Grace. "Good morning. You were up nice and early. Did you sleep well?" "Better than I have in weeks," Grace admitted. "What can I do to help?" Sarah put her to work immediately, and Grace found comfort in the familiar routine of preparing breakfast. They worked in companionable silence, falling into an easy rhythm. When the ranch hands started filing in, Grace felt a moment of shyness, but they were all polite and respectful, tipping their hats and murmuring good mornings. Marcus came in last, his hair damp, as if he had just washed up at the pump outside. His eyes found Grace immediately, and he gave her a small nod that somehow conveyed both a greeting and a question about how she was doing. She smiled back, hoping he understood that she was grateful, that she was all right. Breakfast was a hearty meal of eggs, bacon, biscuits, and gravy. The men ate with the focused intensity of people who needed fuel for a long day of hard labor. Grace served and refilled coffee cups, observing the dynamics of the household. Robert Russell clearly commanded respect, but not fear. He joked with the men and asked about their families. This was a place built on mutual respect, and Grace felt privileged to be a part of it, even temporarily. After breakfast, Sarah took Grace aside to explain her duties. She would help with cooking, cleaning, laundry, and tending the vegetable garden. She would also spend time each day with Margaret, helping her prepare for the baby and keeping her company. It was more work than Grace had done at her father's ranch, where they had hired help for most tasks, but she welcomed it. Honest work felt good, felt purposeful. The days fell into a pattern. Grace rose before dawn, helped prepare breakfast, spent the morning cleaning and doing laundry, tended the garden in the afternoon, and helped with supper preparation in the evening. In between, she spent hours with Margaret, who was grateful for the company and the help. They sewed tiny garments for the coming baby, and Margaret taught Grace things her own mother had never bothered to share about childbirth and motherhood. Marcus was often around the main house on various errands, and Grace found herself looking for him more than she wanted to admit. Sometimes their eyes would meet across the yard, and he would touch the brim of his hat in acknowledgement. Other times he would appear at the kitchen door, asking for water, or a bit of food to take with him, and they would exchange a few words. Nothing significant, nothing that could even be called flirting, but there was an awareness between them that grew stronger with each passing day. It was about a week after Grace's arrival that Marcus sought her out deliberately. She was in the vegetable garden, pulling weeds in the evening cool, when she heard his footsteps on the path. "Grace," he said quietly, and something in his tone made her look up sharply. "What is it? Is something wrong?" Marcus glanced around to make sure they were alone before speaking. "I was in town today picking up supplies. I heard talk at the general store. A man was there asking questions, showing a photograph around. He was looking for a missing woman, described you pretty accurately. Said her name was Grace Gallagher, and that her family was worried sick about her." Grace felt her blood turn to ice. "Was it my father or Bernard Whitmore?" "Neither. The man asking questions said he was hired by your father to find you. A tracker type, from the looks of him. Mean eyes and a badge that might or might not be legitimate." "What did people tell him?" Grace asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Most folks claimed they had not seen anyone matching that description. People around here do not much care for outsiders sticking their noses into other people's business. But Grace, you need to be prepared. He was thorough, and he will likely make his way out to the ranches eventually. Grace stood up, brushing dirt from her hands, her mind racing. "Should I leave? Go somewhere else? I do not want to bring trouble to the Russells after they have been so kind to me." "No," Marcus said firmly. He stepped closer, and Grace could see the determination in his eyes. "You are safe here. Mr. Russell knows about the situation, and he is not going to let some bounty hunter drag you off against your will. But you need to be smart about this. Stay close to the house. Do not go into town. And if this man shows up here, you let the Russells do the talking." "I am frightened," Grace admitted, hating how her voice shook. I thought I would have more time, that maybe my father would give up. Marcus reached out and took her hand, his calloused fingers warm and strong around hers. It was the first time he had touched her beyond helping her on and off his horse, and the contact sent a jolt through her entire body. You are braver than you think, Grace. You ran into the desert with nothing but determination and hope. You have built a life here in just 1 week. You are not the same scared girl I found out there. Do not let fear take away what you have fought for. Grace looked up into his face, seeing not just kindness there, but something deeper, something that made her heart beat faster. Thank you, Marcus, for everything, for saving me that day, for bringing me here, for watching out for me. I would do it again in a heartbeat, he said softly. His thumb brushed across her knuckles, a gentle, deliberate touch. You deserve to be free, Grace. You deserve to choose your own path. They stood there for a long moment, hands clasped, something unspoken but powerful passing between them. Then Marcus reluctantly released her hand and stepped back. I should get back before someone notices I am gone too long, but be careful, all right, and trust that we will keep you safe. Grace watched him walk away, her hand still tingling from his touch. She had been trying not to think about the growing feelings she had for Marcus, trying to focus on survival and work and building a new life. But in that moment, standing in the garden with the sun setting behind the hills, she could not deny it anymore. She was falling for him, falling hard and fast, and the realization both thrilled and terrified her. The next few days were tense. Grace found herself jumping at every unexpected sound, watching the road for signs of approaching riders. Margaret noticed her nervousness and asked about it, and Grace reluctantly explained the situation. Margaret was outraged on her behalf and promised to help however she could. Any man who tries to drag you back to a forced marriage will have to deal with me, Margaret declared, her hand resting protectively on her swollen belly. And I promise you, even 7 months pregnant, I can be quite formidable when I am angry. Grace laughed despite her anxiety, grateful for Margaret's fierce loyalty. The two women had become genuine friends, and Grace treasured that bond. She had never had many friends growing up, her father having isolated her from most social opportunities. And discovering the joy of female friendship was almost as precious as her freedom. It was 4 days after Marcus's warning that the tracker finally arrived at the Double R. Grace was helping Sarah prepare lunch when they heard the sound of hoofbeats in the yard. Sarah looked out the window and then turned to Grace with a grim expression. There is a man out there I do not recognize, wearing a badge and carrying himself like he owns the place. You had better go to your room and stay there until we handle this. Grace's first instinct was to run, to flee out the back door and keep running until she collapsed. But Marcus's words echoed in her mind. You are braver than you think. She straightened her shoulders and shook her head. No, I will not hide. If this is about me, I should be present. Sarah looked like she wanted to argue, but there was no time. Robert Russell was already approaching the house with the stranger in tow. Grace moved to stand beside Sarah, her hands clasped tightly in front of her to keep them from shaking. The man who entered the kitchen was exactly as Marcus had described, hard-eyed and mean-looking, with a badge pinned to his vest and a gun on his hip. He looked around the room with the assessing gaze of a predator, and when his eyes landed on Grace, they narrowed with satisfaction. Miss Grace Gallagher, I presume, he said, his voice rough as gravel. I am Deputy Marshal Tucker. Your father hired me to bring you home. This is my home now, Grace said, forcing her voice to remain steady. I am not going anywhere with you. Tucker smiled, but there was no warmth in it. I am afraid that is not your decision to make, miss. You are your father's legal dependent, and he has the right to determine where you live until you are married or reach the age of majority. She is 21 years old, Sarah interjected sharply. She is well past the age of majority. Not in New Mexico territory she is not, Tucker countered. The law there says a woman is under her father's authority until she marries, no matter her age. And since Miss Gallagher is betrothed to Mr. Bernard Whitmore, her running off like this is a breach of a legally binding agreement. I never agreed to anything, Grace said, anger starting to override her fear. My father made that agreement without my consent. Your consent was not required, Tucker said flatly. He pulled out a set of papers from his coat. I have the legal documents right here. Now, you can come with me peacefully, or I can arrest you for theft. Your father claims you took money and valuables when you left. That is a lie, Grace's voice rose. I only took what was mine, my own savings and my mother's hairbrush. Robert Russell stepped forward, his expression thunderous. Marshal Tucker, I do not care what papers you are waving around. Miss Gallagher is an employee of this ranch, and she is not going anywhere unless she chooses to. If you try to take her by force, you will have a problem with me and every man who works for me. Tucker's hand moved closer to his gun. Are you threatening a lawman, Mr. Russell? I am stating facts, Robert said coolly. This is my property, and you have no jurisdiction here. We are in California, not New Mexico territory. Your authority ends at the border. Actually, I have been deputized to work across territorial lines for this case, Tucker said, but there was a flicker of uncertainty in his eyes now. Mr. Whitmore is a prominent citizen, and he has friends in high places. The back door opened, and Marcus strode in, followed by 3 other ranch hands. They arranged themselves behind Grace and the Russells, a silent show of solidarity. Marcus's eyes were hard as he stared down Tucker. I think you heard Mr. Russell, Marcus said quietly. Miss Gallagher stays here. Tucker looked around at the assembled group, clearly calculating his odds. He was outnumbered and outgunned, and he knew it. His jaw clenched with frustration. This is not over. I will be back with reinforcements and proper warrants. You are harboring a fugitive. She is not a fugitive, Sarah said firmly. She is a woman exercising her right to choose her own life. Now, get off our property. Tucker glared at them all, his gaze lingering on Grace with a promise of future trouble. Then he turned on his heel and stalked out. They all remained silent, listening as he mounted his horse and rode away. Only when the hoofbeats had faded completely did anyone relax. Grace's legs gave out, and she sank into the nearest chair, shaking uncontrollably. Sarah immediately moved to her side, wrapping a comforting arm around her shoulders. It is all right, dear. He is gone. But he will be back, Grace said, her voice breaking. He said so. He will come back with more men, and I cannot let you all be hurt because of me. Maybe I should just go, run somewhere else. You are not going anywhere, Marcus said, moving to kneel in front of her chair. He took both of her hands in his, forcing her to meet his eyes. Do you hear me, Grace? You are not running, and we are not letting him take you. That man is a bully with a badge, and bullies back down when people stand up to them. Marcus is right, Robert agreed. Besides, I am not convinced his legal authority is as solid as he claims. I will send word to a lawyer I know in Yuma. We will find out exactly what your legal standing is and what rights you have. This is not the Dark Ages. Women have some protections under the law, even if they are not what they should be. Grace looked around at these people who barely knew her, yet were willing to stand against the law itself to protect her. Why? She whispered. Why are you all doing this for me? Because it is the right thing to do, Sarah said simply. And because we have come to care about you. Grace, you have become part of this family. Marcus squeezed her hands gently. And because you are free to choose now. That is what I told you that first day, is it not? You are free to choose your own path. I meant it then, and I mean it now. Grace felt tears streaming down her face, but they were not tears of fear or despair. They were tears of gratitude and something deeper, something that had been growing in her heart since the moment Marcus had reached down to pull her onto his horse. She looked into his eyes and saw her own feelings reflected back at her. The next few days were a flurry of activity. Robert sent urgent messages to his lawyer and also to the territorial governor, calling in favors and making inquiries about Grace's legal situation. Marcus and the other ranch hands took turns keeping watch, making sure Tucker did not return with reinforcements. Grace continued her work, finding solace in routine and purpose, but she was always aware of the sword hanging over her head. It was during this tense time that Grace and Marcus began spending more time together. He would find excuses to be near the house, and she would find excuses to be outside. They would talk about everything and nothing, his childhood in Missouri, her dreams of traveling to San Francisco, their favorite books, their opinions on everything from cattle breeds to the best way to make biscuits. One evening, after supper had been cleared and the dishes washed, Marcus asked if Grace would like to take a walk. Sarah gave them both a knowing look, but said nothing, and Grace found herself strolling beside Marcus toward the corrals where the horses dozed in the fading light. I have been thinking, Marcus said after they had walked in silence for a bit. About what happens next, I mean, with the legal situation and everything. Grace's heart sank. Was he about to suggest that she should leave after all? That the trouble was not worth it? "What have you been thinking?" she asked carefully. Marcus stopped walking and turned to face her. In the twilight, his features were shadowed, but she could see the intensity in his eyes. "I have been thinking that there might be a way to solve this problem permanently. A way that would put you completely beyond your father's reach and make it impossible for him, or Whitmore, or that tracker to have any claim on you." "What do you mean?" Marcus took a deep breath, and Grace suddenly realized he was nervous. Marcus, who was always so calm and competent, was actually nervous. "Grace, we have only known each other for 2 weeks. I know that is not very long, and maybe I am crazy for even suggesting this, but I feel like I have known you much longer. These past days, getting to know you, watching you work and laugh and show so much courage, I have come to care for you a great deal." Grace's heart was pounding so hard, she thought it might burst from her chest. "I care for you too, Marcus, very much." "Then marry me," Marcus said, the words tumbling out in a rush. "I know it is sudden, and I know I do not have much to offer you. I am just a ranch hand with some savings and a lot of dreams. But if we married, you would be legally my wife, and your father would have no say over you anymore. Whitmore could not touch you. You would be safe." Grace stared at him, torn between joy and doubt. "Marcus, I cannot let you marry me just to save me from my father. That would not be fair to you. You deserve someone you love, someone you chose freely, not someone you felt obligated to protect." "Who says I am doing this out of obligation?" Marcus stepped closer, reaching up to gently cup her face with one calloused hand. "Grace, I am asking you to marry me because I want to. Because when I look at you, I see the person I want to spend my life with. Because you are brave and kind and you make me laugh. Because when I think about my future, you are in it. The legal protection is just a bonus." "You really mean that?" Grace whispered, hardly daring to believe it. "I really mean it." Marcus's thumb brushed across her cheek, wiping away a tear she had not realized had fallen. "I know 2 weeks is not much time, and I know you just escaped one forced marriage. The last thing I want is for you to feel pressured into another one. So, I am asking, Grace Gallagher, not telling. Will you marry me? Not because you have to, but because you want to." Grace thought about the past 2 weeks, about how safe she felt with Marcus, how comfortable, how understood. She thought about the way her heart lifted every time she saw him, the way his quiet strength made her feel like she could face anything. She thought about the difference between being forced to marry Bernard Whitmore, a man who saw her as property, and choosing to marry Marcus Everett, a man who saw her as an equal. "Yes," she said, her voice growing stronger with each word. "Yes, Marcus, I will marry you. Not because I have to, but because I want to. Because I care for you more than I thought possible in such a short time. Because when I think about my future, you are in it too." The smile that broke across Marcus's face was like the sun coming out from behind clouds. He laughed, a sound of pure joy, and then he was kissing her. Grace melted into the kiss, her arms wrapping around his neck, feeling like she was finally, truly home. When they finally broke apart, both breathless and smiling, Marcus rested his forehead against hers. "We should probably tell the Russells," he murmured. "They are going to think we are insane," Grace said, but she could not stop smiling. "Maybe we are," Marcus agreed, "but I think it is a good kind of insane." As it turned out, the Russells were not at all surprised by their announcement. Sarah actually admitted that she had been hoping something like this would happen, and Robert clapped Marcus on the shoulder with approval. They agreed that the sooner the marriage took place, the better, both for Grace's legal protection and because there was no point in waiting once they had made up their minds. 3 days later, Grace found herself standing in the small church in the nearby town of Welton, wearing a simple but beautiful dress that Sarah and Margaret had somehow produced seemingly from thin air. Marcus stood beside her in his best clothes, his hair neatly combed, his hand warm and steady as it held hers. Robert and Sarah served as witnesses, along with Peter and a beaming Margaret who looked ready to burst with happiness. The ceremony itself was brief and simple. The preacher asked the required questions, and Grace answered, "I do," with a clear, confident voice that would have shocked her father. When Marcus slipped a simple gold band on her finger, one that he had purchased with his own savings, she felt the last chains of her old life fall away. She was Grace Everett now, wife of Marcus Everett, and no one could force her into anything ever again. Marcus kissed her gently as the preacher pronounced them husband and wife, and Grace felt tears of joy streaming down her face. This was what marriage should be: a choice, a partnership, a joining of two people who genuinely cared for each other. Not a business transaction or a settling of debts, but something real and precious. The Russells hosted a small celebration back at the ranch, and even the ranch hands joined in, toasting the newlyweds and offering good-natured jokes about married life. Grace could not stop smiling, could not stop looking at the ring on her finger and the man beside her, who was now her husband. As the evening wound down, Sarah approached Grace with a knowing smile. "We have moved your things to the cabin at the edge of the property. It is small, just 2 rooms really, but it is private. We thought you and Marcus would appreciate having your own space." Grace hugged Sarah tightly. "Thank you for everything. I do not know how I can ever repay you for all you have done." "Just be happy," Sarah said simply. "That is all the payment I need." Marcus appeared at Grace's elbow, offering his hand. "Ready to go home, Mrs. Everett?" Grace loved the sound of that, loved the way he said it with such warmth and pride. "Ready," she agreed, taking his hand. They walked together through the twilight to the small cabin Sarah had mentioned. It was indeed modest, with a main room that served as both kitchen and living space, and a bedroom barely large enough for a bed and a trunk. But it had a solid roof, a stone fireplace, and a front porch with a view of the sunset. To Grace, it was perfect. Marcus lit a lantern, and in its warm glow, they looked at each other with a mixture of joy and nervousness. They were married now, but in many ways they were still strangers, still learning each other. "I want you to know something," Marcus said, taking both of her hands. "I meant everything I said when I proposed. I married you because I want you in my life, not just because of the legal situation. But I also know this has all happened very fast. We do not have to rush anything. We can take our time getting to know each other properly." Grace felt a surge of love for this man, who was so thoughtful, so concerned with her comfort. She squeezed his hands and smiled. "I appreciate that, Marcus. I truly do. But I also want you to know that I chose this. I chose you. I am your wife, and I want to be your wife in every sense." Marcus smiled, and there was warmth and desire in his eyes now, mixed with tenderness. "Then come here, wife, and let me show you how a husband should treat the woman he loves." Their first night together was everything Grace had never dared to hope for. Gentle and passionate, awkward and perfect all at once. Marcus was patient and considerate, making sure she felt safe and cared for. When Grace woke the next morning, wrapped in his arms, the sun streaming through the window, she felt a peace and happiness she had never known existed. The next few weeks were a golden time. Grace fell into the rhythm of married life, discovering the small joys of keeping her own home and sharing it with someone she loved. She continued to help the Russells, especially as Margaret's time drew near, but she also had her own space, her own life with Marcus. They talked for hours in the evenings, learning each other's quirks and habits. Grace discovered that Marcus sang quietly to himself while he worked, and that he had a surprisingly good sense of humor once you got past his quiet exterior. Marcus learned that Grace was fiercely competitive at card games and that she had a talent for drawing that she had never been encouraged to develop. It was about a month after their wedding that word finally came from Robert's lawyer. Grace and Marcus were called up to the main house to hear the news. Robert looked satisfied as he read the letter aloud. "The lawyer says that your marriage to Marcus completely supersedes any claims your father might have had. You are legally Marcus's wife, and as such, under his protection rather than your father's. Furthermore, the betrothal agreement your father made with Bernard Whitmore is null and void since you were never a legal party to it. Whitmore would have grounds to sue your father for breach of contract, but he has no claim on you whatsoever." Grace felt like she could breathe fully for the first time in months. "So I am truly free? My father cannot force me to come back?" "He cannot," Robert confirmed. "Not legally. Now, he could still try to make trouble, and from what Marcus told me about that tracker, Whitmore might not give up easily either, but the law is on your side now." Marcus pulled Grace close, his arm around her shoulders. "Thank you, Mr. Russell, for everything you have done for us. You have earned your place here, both of you," Robert said warmly. I was going to wait a while to mention this, but given the circumstances, now seems like a good time. I have been thinking about expanding the ranch operations. Marcus, you have been talking about wanting to start breeding horses. What would you say to managing that for me? It would mean more responsibility and better pay, enough to support a family. Marcus's eyes widened with surprise and gratitude. Sir, I would be honored. I have a lot of ideas about bloodlines and training methods that I think could really work. Then let's discuss it properly next week, Robert said. In the meantime, just enjoy your newlywed phase. God knows it does not last forever. He said this with affection, glancing at Sarah, who swatted his arm playfully. Life settled into a comfortable pattern over the following months. Marcus began his new role as horse breeding manager, and Grace could see how much he thrived with the additional responsibility and creative freedom. He was good at it too, with an instinctive understanding of horses and breeding that produced excellent results. The first foals born under his program were strong and well-formed, and word began to spread that the Double R was producing quality stock. Grace continued to help with the household and was present when Margaret finally gave birth to a healthy baby boy they named Samuel. Grace helped Sarah care for mother and child during those first difficult weeks, and holding little Samuel in her arms made her start thinking about her own future children. She broached the subject with Marcus one evening as they sat on their porch watching the stars. "How do you feel about becoming a father someday?" she asked, her head resting on his shoulder. Marcus was quiet for a moment, his arm tightening around her. "I would like that very much. A house full of children with your courage and my stubbornness, though perhaps that is a recipe for chaos." Grace laughed. "Perhaps, but good chaos, I think." "Are you saying you want to start trying for a baby?" Marcus asked, turning to look at her. "Maybe," Grace said. "I mean, I know we have not been married that long, but we are happy. We have a home, we have income. Why wait?" Marcus kissed her softly. "Then we will not wait. Let's build the family we both want, Grace. Let's build a life filled with love and laughter and all the things we both missed growing up." Grace felt tears prick at her eyes, but they were happy tears. "I love you, Marcus Everett. I love you so much it scares me sometimes." "I love you too," Marcus murmured against her lips. "More than I knew it was possible to love someone. You changed my whole life that day in the desert. I thought I was rescuing you, but really, I think you rescued me too." "From what?" Grace asked, curious. "From loneliness," Marcus said simply. "From thinking that hard work and open spaces were enough. You showed me that there is more to life than that having someone to share it with makes all the difference." It was in late autumn, about 6 months after their marriage, that trouble finally caught up with them again. Grace was hanging laundry behind the cabin when she heard riders approaching fast. She looked up to see Marcus running toward her from the horse corral, his face urgent. "Grace, get in the house and stay there." "What is happening?" "That tracker is back, and he brought friends. Go, now." Grace's heart leaped into her throat, but she obeyed, hurrying into the cabin and watching through the window as several riders approached the main house. She recognized Marshal Tucker in the lead, and beside him was a man she had hoped never to see again, Bernard Whitmore. Whitmore was exactly as she remembered, heavyset and pompous, with cold eyes and a cruel mouth. He dismounted with the self-importance of someone who believed the world owed him whatever he wanted. Tucker and 2 other men followed him toward where Robert Russell was emerging from the barn, with Marcus and several ranch hands flanking him. Grace could not hear what was being said, but she could see Robert shaking his head firmly, see Marcus standing with his hand near his gun, see the tension in every line of the confrontation. She felt helpless watching from the window, hating that others were fighting her battle for her. The standoff seemed to last forever. Grace saw Tucker pull out papers, saw Whitmore gesticulating angrily. But Robert stood his ground, and so did Marcus and the other men. Finally, after what seemed like an eternity, Tucker and Whitmore remounted their horses. But before they rode away, Whitmore pointed directly at the cabin where Grace was hiding, and even from this distance she could see the fury on his face. Marcus came straight to the cabin as soon as the men had ridden away. He found Grace pale and shaking by the window. "They are gone," he said, pulling her into his arms. "You are safe." "What did they want? What did they say?" Marcus's jaw was tight with anger. Whitmore was ranting about breach of contract and demanding that you be turned over to him. Tucker kept waving around papers that he claimed gave them the authority to take you. But Mr. Russell stood firm. He showed them the legal opinion from our lawyer and told them that if they set foot on this property again without a proper warrant from a California judge, he would have them arrested for trespassing and harassment. "Will they get a warrant?" Grace asked fearfully. "They can try, but our lawyer does not think any California judge will issue one. You are legally married to me. Whitmore has no claim on you, and your father's authority ended the moment you became my wife. They are grasping at straws, trying to intimidate us into complying. I saw Whitmore point at the cabin. He knows I am here." "Let him know," Marcus said fiercely. "He cannot touch you, Grace. I will not let him. None of us will." But that night, as they lay in bed, Grace could not sleep. She kept thinking about Whitmore's cruel face, about the trouble her presence was causing for everyone she cared about. Marcus sensed her restlessness and pulled her closer. "Talk to me," he murmured. "Tell me what you are thinking." "I am thinking that maybe I should confront him directly," Grace said. "Face him and tell him to his face that I will never be his wife, that he needs to let me go." "Absolutely not," Marcus said firmly. "Grace, men like Whitmore do not respond to reason or appeals to their better nature because they do not have a better nature. All that would accomplish is putting you in danger." "Then what do we do? Just wait for him to give up?" "If necessary, yes. But I have another idea." Marcus sat up, lighting the bedside lamp so he could see her face. "What if we left? Not forever, but just until this blows over. I have been thinking about taking you to San Francisco. You mentioned once that you wanted to see it. We could go for a few months, get some distance from all this. By the time we came back, Whitmore will have moved on to some other scheme." Grace considered this. Part of her hated the idea of running again, of letting Whitmore drive her from her home. But another part recognized the wisdom in removing herself from the situation entirely. "What about your work? The horses? Peter can handle them for a few months. He is good with horses, and Mr. Russell would understand. I have some money saved up, enough for us to live modestly in San Francisco, while I look for temporary work. We could make an adventure of it." "An adventure," Grace repeated, and despite everything, she found herself smiling. "I like the sound of that." They discussed it more over the next few days and finally decided to take Marcus's suggestion. The Russells were sorry to see them go, but understood the reasoning. Sarah helped Grace pack, and Margaret tearfully made Grace promise to write often. "You will come back, though, will you not?" Margaret asked, as she held Grace's hands on the morning of their departure. "This is your home. Promise me you will come back." "We will," Grace promised. "A few months, that is all. Just long enough for Whitmore to realize he has lost and move on with his life." The journey to San Francisco was long, but filled with wonder. Grace had never been to a city before, and as they approached the bustling port town, she felt both intimidated and excited by the sheer size of it. Buildings rose higher than she had ever imagined possible, and the streets were crowded with people from all walks of life. Marcus found them lodging in a modest boarding house run by a kind widow named Mrs. Chen. The room was small but clean, and the price was reasonable. Marcus quickly found work at the docks, loading and unloading cargo. It was hard labor, but it paid well enough to support them. Grace, in turn, discovered a talent she had not known she possessed. She had always enjoyed drawing, and in San Francisco, she met a woman who taught painting classes for ladies. Using some of their carefully hoarded savings, Grace took lessons and discovered that she had a real gift for capturing the world on canvas. She began selling small paintings of the San Francisco Bay and harbor scenes to tourists, and to her surprise, people were willing to pay good money for them. Those months in San Francisco were a time of growth for both of them. Away from the ranch and the pressures of their old lives, Grace and Marcus had the chance to simply be a married couple, exploring the city, meeting new people, building their relationship on a foundation of shared experiences and mutual respect. It was during this time that Grace realized she was pregnant. She had suspected for a few weeks, but when a doctor confirmed it, she felt a mix of joy and nervousness. She waited until they were having dinner in their small room to tell Marcus. "I have something to tell you," she said, trying to keep her voice casual. "I saw a doctor today." Marcus's fork stopped halfway to his mouth, his eyes widening with concern. "Are you all right? Are you sick?" "No, not sick. Pregnant." For a moment, Marcus just stared at her. Then a smile spread across his face so wide and bright that it transformed his entire appearance. "Pregnant? Truly? We are going to have a baby." "We are," Grace confirmed, and then she was laughing, because Marcus had jumped up and swept her into his arms, spinning her around despite the cramped space. When? How far along? About 2 months, the doctor thinks, so the baby should come sometime in early summer. Marcus set her down gently, as if she were made of glass. We need to take good care of you. You should not be on your feet so much. You should rest more. You should... Grace laughed and put her hand over his mouth. I should continue living my life normally because I am pregnant, not ill. Women have been having babies since the beginning of time, Marcus. I know, but this is our baby, our child. He placed his hand gently on her still flat stomach, wonder in his eyes. I am going to be a father. And you are going to be wonderful at it, Grace said softly. I have seen how you are with the animals, how patient and kind. You are going to be an amazing father. They held each other in the fading light, talking about their future, about names and nurseries, and whether the baby would have Grace's green eyes or Marcus's dark ones. For the first time, Grace felt completely, entirely happy. She had her freedom, her husband, and now a child on the way. Everything she had dreamed of during those dark days before her escape had come true. After 4 months in San Francisco, word reached them through a letter from Sarah Russell that Bernard Whitmore had finally given up his pursuit. He had apparently moved on to courting another woman, the daughter of another prominent merchant, and seemed to have forgotten about Grace entirely. Her father had also ceased making inquiries, having disowned her publicly and moved on with his life. It is safe to come home, Sarah wrote, and we miss you both terribly. Please come back soon. The ranch is not the same without you. Grace and Marcus looked at each other and knew without speaking that it was time to return to the Double R. They had enjoyed their time in San Francisco, but their hearts belonged to the wide open spaces of the Arizona desert and the people who had become their family. The journey back was slower than their journey out, with Marcus being extra cautious because of Grace's pregnancy. But finally, one warm spring day, they rode into the yard of the Double R Ranch, and the welcome they received brought tears to Grace's eyes. Sarah ran out to embrace her, and even stoic Robert Russell had suspiciously bright eyes as he shook Marcus's hand. Margaret appeared with little Samuel, now a chubby toddler, and immediately wanted to hear all about the baby Grace was carrying. The ranch hands gathered around to welcome them back, and Grace realized how much she had missed this place and these people. Marcus resumed his work with the horses, and Grace settled back into the rhythm of ranch life, though Sarah and Margaret insisted she not overdo things given her condition. The cabin that had seemed so perfect before now felt even more like home. Grace spent her free time painting scenes of ranch life, and Marcus built a small addition to the cabin that would serve as a nursery. As Grace's pregnancy progressed, Marcus became increasingly protective. He fussed over her constantly, insisting she rest more, eat more, take better care of herself. Grace found it endearing even when it was occasionally exasperating. I am not made of china, she told him one evening, as he tried to stop her from carrying a basket of laundry. Women work right up until they go into labor all the time. Other women are not my wife, Marcus said stubbornly, and I will worry about you whether you want me to or not. It is part of the marriage vows. Love, honor, and worry excessively. Grace laughed and kissed him. I do not recall that last part being in the ceremony. It was implied, Marcus said, pulling her close and resting his hand on her swollen belly. I love you both so much, Grace. I just want everything to go perfectly. It will, Grace assured him. I am healthy, the baby is healthy, and I have the best husband in the world. What could go wrong? As it turned out, Grace's confidence was well-founded. When her labor began on a warm June morning, Sarah and Margaret were there to help, along with a midwife from town. Marcus paced outside the cabin, driving the ranch hands crazy with his nervous energy, until finally, after 8 hours of labor, a baby's cry rang out. Sarah emerged with a smile on her face. You can come in now, Papa. You have a son. Marcus practically ran into the cabin. He found Grace propped up in bed, exhausted but radiant, holding a tiny bundle wrapped in soft blankets. His son. His and Grace's son. Come meet your papa, Grace said softly, holding out the baby. Marcus approached almost reverently, taking the infant with careful, inexperienced hands. The baby was perfect, tiny and red-faced, with a shock of dark hair and eyes that would probably be brown, like his father's. Marcus felt his heart expand in a way he had not known was possible. Hello, little one, he murmured. "I am your papa, and I am going to love you and protect you every single day of your life." "What should we name him?" Grace asked. "We talked about so many names, but now that he is here, I cannot decide." Marcus looked down at his son, then at his wife. "What about Matthew, Matthew Everett? It means gift of God, and that is what he is, what we both are. You and this baby, you are the greatest gifts I have ever received." "Matthew," Grace repeated, testing the name. "I love it. Matthew Marcus Everett. We can call him Matt for short." "Perfect," Marcus agreed. He carefully handed the baby back to Grace and sat on the edge of the bed, his arm around his wife, gazing down at their son. "Look at what we made, Grace. Look at this miracle." "I know," Grace whispered, tears of joy running down her face. "I look at him, and I can hardly believe this is real, that we are real, that I went from being trapped and miserable to having everything I ever wanted." "You fought for it," Marcus reminded her. "You ran into the desert with nothing but courage and hope. You built this life, Grace. We built it together." The months after Matthew's birth were busy but joyful. Grace adjusted to motherhood with the same determination she brought to everything else, though there were plenty of moments when she felt overwhelmed and uncertain. Marcus was a devoted father, spending every free moment with his son, teaching him about the world, even though Matthew was far too young to understand. The ranch prospered under Robert Russell's management, and Marcus's horse breeding program became known throughout the territory for producing excellent stock. As Matthew grew from an infant to a toddler, Grace found herself longing for another child, and Marcus was more than happy to oblige. Their second child, a daughter they named Elizabeth but called Lizzie, was born 2 years after Matthew. Where Matthew was serious and watchful like his father, Lizzie was vivacious and fearless, always getting into mischief. Grace joked that Lizzie had inherited both her mother's stubbornness and her father's determination, a combination that meant the little girl was a handful from the moment she could walk. As the years passed, Grace sometimes thought back to that desperate girl running through the desert, terrified and alone. She thought about how one moment of courage, one decision to run toward an uncertain future, rather than accept a certain fate, had changed everything. She had been given the chance to choose, and she had chosen freedom, chosen love, chosen a life of her own making. Marcus thrived in his role as horse breeder and manager. Under his guidance, the Double R became known throughout California and Arizona territory for producing some of the finest horses in the region. His reputation grew, and with it came financial security that allowed them to expand their little cabin into a proper house with room for their growing family. When Matthew was 5 and Lizzie was 3, Grace gave birth to twin boys they named Daniel and David. The cabin-turned-house rang with the sounds of children laughing and playing, and Grace could not imagine a more perfect life. On their 10th wedding anniversary, Marcus surprised Grace by taking her back to the spot where they had first met. They rode out into the desert, leaving the children in Sarah's capable care for the day, and Marcus guided his horse to the exact creek bed where Grace had run to him all those years ago. They dismounted and stood looking at the familiar landscape, so much the same, yet somehow different, because they were different, transformed by a decade of love and partnership. "Do you remember?" Marcus asked, taking her hand. "I remember everything," Grace said. "I remember being so frightened I could barely breathe. I remember seeing you riding toward me and making a split-second decision to trust a complete stranger. I remember you reaching down to help me up, and I remember thinking that no matter what happened next, at least I had tried to save myself. I remember thinking you were the bravest person I had ever seen," Marcus said, "running into the desert in a torn dress with nothing but a carpetbag and determination. I knew right then that you were special, that you were someone worth fighting for." Grace leaned into him, resting her head on his shoulder. "You told me I was free to choose. That was the moment everything changed, Marcus. Not when you pulled me onto your horse, or when you brought me to the Double R, or even when you asked me to marry you. It was when you told me I was free to choose. You gave me back something I thought I had lost forever. My own agency, my own power to shape my life. And look what you did with it," Marcus said, gesturing at the vast landscape around them. "You built a home, raised a family, created art, made friends. You took that freedom and used it to create something beautiful." "We created something beautiful," Grace corrected, "together. I could not have done any of it without you, Marcus. You have been my partner in every sense of the word. You never tried to control me or limit me. You have supported every dream, every ambition. You made me feel safe enough to be fully myself." Marcus turned to face her, taking both her hands in his. "Grace Everett, you have given me the greatest 10 years of my life. You have given me children, a home, a purpose, and more love than I knew existed in the world. I would relive every moment, every challenge, every joy. You are my greatest adventure." Grace reached up to cup his face, looking into the eyes she had come to know better than her own. "And you are mine. You saved me that day in the desert, but you have been saving me every day since in little ways and big ones. You save me with your patience when I am frustrated. You save me with your laughter when I am too serious. You save me with your love when I doubt myself. You are my hero, Marcus Everett. Not because you rescued me from a forced marriage, but because you showed me what real love looks like." They kissed then, a long, deep kiss that held 10 years of shared history and the promise of decades more to come. When they finally broke apart, Marcus pulled something from his pocket. "I have something for you," he said, handing her a small wrapped package. Grace unwrapped it carefully to find a beautiful leather-bound journal with her initials embossed on the cover. "Marcus, it is beautiful. I thought you could use it to write down our story," Marcus explained. "For the children, so they know how their parents met and fell in love, so they understand the importance of freedom and choice and fighting for what you believe in." Grace felt tears welling up. "That is perfect. I will start tonight. Our story deserves to be remembered and passed down." They spent the rest of the afternoon in that special place, talking and remembering, before finally riding back to the ranch as the sun began to set. Their children ran out to greet them, and Grace scooped up Lizzie while Marcus caught Matthew. The twins toddled after them, and for a moment, Grace just stood there, surrounded by her family, feeling overwhelming gratitude. That evening, after the children were in bed, Grace sat down with her new journal and began to write. She wrote about running through the desert in terror. She wrote about seeing Marcus for the first time and making the decision to trust him. She wrote about the Russells' kindness and finding work and purpose. She wrote about falling in love slowly and then all at once. She wrote about their wedding and their time in San Francisco and the births of each of their children. But most importantly, she wrote about the moment Marcus had said, "You are free to choose now," because that was the heart of their story, the foundation of everything that came after: freedom, choice, and the courage to build a life based on love rather than obligation. As the years continued to pass, the Everett family grew and prospered. Matthew grew into a serious, thoughtful young man who shared his father's gift with horses. Lizzie became an accomplished artist like her mother, with paintings that captured the beauty and harshness of the desert landscape. The twins, Daniel and David, were inseparable troublemakers who kept everyone on their toes, but who also had hearts of gold. Grace and Marcus added 2 more children to their brood, another daughter named Caroline, and finally, when Grace was 38, a surprise baby boy they named Thomas, after Grace's younger brother, whom she had reconnected with years earlier. Thomas Gallagher had left their father's ranch as soon as he was old enough, unable to stomach the old man's cruelty. He had tracked down his sister, apologizing for not having the courage to help her escape years before. Grace had forgiven him immediately, and Thomas had become a beloved uncle to all the Everett children, visiting frequently and eventually settling on a small ranch of his own, not far from the Double R. Robert and Sarah Russell aged gracefully, eventually turning over more and more of the ranch operations to Marcus, while they enjoyed their grandchildren. Margaret and Peter had 3 more children after Samuel, and the ranch became a bustling community of multiple families all working and living together. Grace never stopped painting, and her work gained recognition throughout the region. A gallery in San Francisco even held an exhibition of her desert landscapes, and several pieces sold for impressive sums. But Grace never let the success change her. She remained the same woman who had run into the desert with nothing but hope, grounded, grateful, and fierce in her love for her family. Marcus continued to breed exceptional horses, and the Everett line became sought after by ranchers and cavalry alike. He took pride in his work, but never let it consume him. His family always came first, and he made sure his children knew they were loved and valued for who they were, not what they could accomplish. On their 25th wedding anniversary, the Everetts gathered the entire extended family, including the Russells and all the ranch hands past and present, for a celebration. It was a beautiful summer evening, and someone had set up tables and lanterns in the yard. There was music and dancing, and Grace found herself swept into Marcus's arms for a slow waltz as the sun set. 25 years, Marcus marveled. Where did the time go? Into building this, Grace said, gesturing at the crowd of people they loved. Into raising our children and creating a life worth living. I regret nothing, Marcus. Not a single moment. Not even the hard times, the times when money was tight or the children were sick or work was overwhelming. Especially not those times, Grace said firmly, because we faced them together, and they made the good times even sweeter. You gave me the most precious gift anyone could give, the freedom to choose my own path. And I chose you, chose this life, and I would choose it again every single day. Marcus pulled her closer, and they swayed together to the music, surrounded by the fruits of their love and labor. Matthew danced with his sweetheart, a kind girl from town he planned to marry the following spring. Lizzie was showing Caroline how to paint by the light of the lanterns. The twins were racing around with their younger siblings, full of energy even as the day wound down. We did all right, did we not? Marcus said softly. We did better than all right, Grace replied. We did extraordinarily. We took broken pieces and built something whole and beautiful. We took fear and transformed it into love. We took a chance meeting in the desert and turned it into a legacy. As the years continued their inexorable march forward, Grace and Marcus aged together with grace and dignity. They became grandparents, then great-grandparents, watching their family tree spread and flourish. They never forgot those early days, the fear and uncertainty that had brought them together, and they made sure their descendants understood the value of freedom, choice, and fighting for what you believe in. Grace continued writing in her journal, adding to their story with each passing year. She wrote about the joys and sorrows, the triumphs and challenges, always coming back to that central truth, that a life built on love and mutual respect was the greatest achievement possible. When they were both in their 70s, older and slower, but still deeply in love, Grace and Marcus took one final trip out to the desert where they had met. Their joints ached, and they could no longer ride as far or as fast, but they made it to their special place and stood together in the familiar landscape. 50 years, Grace said wonderingly. 50 years since you reached down and pulled a frightened girl onto your horse. Best decision I ever made, Marcus said, his voice rougher with age but still warm with love. You have been my greatest blessing, Grace Everett. Every single day with you has been a gift. Grace leaned into him, feeling the solid strength that had always been there, even as their bodies grew frailer. You told me I was free to choose, and I chose you. I chose love. I chose a life of adventure and partnership and family. And it has been everything I never dared to dream of during those dark days before I ran. They stood there for a long time, remembering, grateful, complete in each other. When they finally rode back to the ranch that had been their home for over 5 decades, they did so hand in hand, still partners, still best friends, still as in love as two people could be. The Everett legacy continued long after Grace and Marcus were gone, passing from generation to generation. Their children and grandchildren told the story of the woman who escaped a marriage she never wanted, and the cowboy who said, "You are free to choose now." It became a family legend, a reminder that courage and love could overcome any obstacle, that freedom was worth fighting for, that building a life based on mutual respect and genuine affection was the greatest achievement possible. And in the desert, in that spot where Grace had run toward an uncertain future and found everything she had ever wanted, wildflowers bloomed every spring in brilliant colors. Local legend said they grew from the tears of joy shed by a woman who discovered that freedom and love were not just possible, but were her birthright, and that sometimes the bravest thing you could do was choose your own path, no matter how frightening that path might seem. Grace and Marcus Everett lived long, full lives surrounded by the family they had created and the love they had nurtured. When they finally passed, within months of each other, as longtime couples often do, they left behind not just descendants, but a legacy of courage, compassion, and the unshakable belief that every person deserves the freedom to choose their own destiny. Their story became woven into the fabric of the land itself, a testament to what is possible when two people choose love over obligation, partnership over control, and freedom over fear. The Double R Ranch continued to thrive for generations, and every child born into the extended family grew up hearing the story of how Great-Grandma Grace ran into the desert, and Great-Grandpa Marcus gave her the most precious gift of all, the choice to build a life of her own making. And every single one of them understood that the greatest love stories are not about destiny or fate, but about two people choosing each other every day, in big ways and small, building something beautiful together, one moment, one decision, one act of love at a time.